Good afternoon. Is this mic on in the back? Yep, great. So thank you very much for coming, and good afternoon. My name is Tom Glaisyer, and I'd like to welcome you to the New America Foundation, to what will be a fascinating discussion about copyright in the digital age. For those of you watching on the web, New America is a public policy institute that looks to new ideas and new thinkers to address the next generation of challenges facing the United States. It's a mission we embrace through 15 programs that cover everything from counterterrorism to education to economic growth, both through centers in DC and in California. I lead our work here in media policy as part of the Open Technology Initiative, of a team of lawyers, technologists, field and policy analysts in DC and also in cities around the country. As a team, we aim to formulate policy and regulatory reforms to support open architectures and open source innovations and facilitate the development and implementation of open technologies and communication networks. We've done a lot of work promoting affordable, universal, and ubiquitous networks and broadband through partnerships with communities, researchers, industry, and public interest groups. And really behind this is a commitment to maximizing the potentials of these technologies by studying their social and economic impacts, particularly on poor, rural, and other underserved constituencies. But obviously, openness isn't just a question of software code, pipes, or open wireless, but also of arts, culture, and health, and that's what brings us here today. And that's how we came to work with Creative Commons on this event, in addition, of course, to publishing all of New America's materials under a Creative Commons license, of course. The event today is titled The Power of Open. The title is the same as the title of the book that many of you have picked up on the way in. And I suspect among you there are people who have extensive experience with Creative Commons and some who have very little and are coming to learn a little. For me, Creative Commons, and for me as someone who works on media and democracy, copyright policy and usage of that policy are very, very live questions. And I look forward to both bringing my perspective in, and also the perspectives of those of you in the audience here and also online during the question and answer session, which will conclude our event. To introduce Creative Commons and the book, we have none other than the CEO of Creative Commons, Cathy Casserly. She will begin the event with a presentation and will share her perspective on the power of open. Subsequently, we will move to a round table type discussion where I will moderate, and we will be joined by Heather LaGarde of IntraHealth, which has a fascinating connection to the Creative Commons work. Rebecca MacKinnon, who's a Schwartz Fellow here, author of the soon-to-be-released and eagerly awaited book, Consent of the Networked. And important for the purpose of this event, a co-founder of Global Voices Online and have some considerable engagement with Creative Commons abroad. And last but not least, Sherwin Siy from Public Knowledge, their Deputy Legal Director, and a mine of information. He'll get the difficult questions. But before we start, I should mention that this event is being live streamed on the web, and everything is on the record forever, or as I say, at least as long as Google or WikiLeaks can find it. For those of you on Twitter, please use the hashtag NAF event, NAFEVENT, to ask questions during the panel and Q&A. We have someone moderate watching that stream, and we'll take questions from Twitter. During the Q&A, please do wait for the microphone. As I mentioned, we have an online audience. It normally is around twice the number of people in the audience live, so we do need to wait for the microphone. And without further introduction, I would like to invite Cathy Casserly on the stage to share her perspective on the power of open. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank, first of all, the New America Foundation. This has just been a terrific venue. They've been hosting us all day as we've been meeting with different groups to tell the story about Creative Commons, and we're just delighted to be in partnership with them as we move ahead. So thank you, all the people at New America. I know there's many of them who have set up and made sure that this afternoon and this evening happens, so thank you. So to start to tell the story of Creative Commons, I'm going to begin with a video that was put together for Creative Commons for our birthday a few years ago. It was put together by Jesse Dillon and his group, and it really is a great video that gives a broad overview of the story of Creative Commons by our board members and incorporating many of the assets that are licensed under Creative Commons license. So let's begin with that.
I might have turned the
What does it mean to be human if we don't have a shared culture? And what does a shared culture mean if you can't share it?
It's only in the last 100 or 150 years or so that we've started tightly restricting how that culture gets used.
The internet enabled an infrastructure where anybody could participate without asking permission.
We have all these new technologies that allow people to express themselves, take control of their own creative impulses, but the law is getting in the way.
Creative Commons is designed to save the world from failed sharing. People who actually want to share stuff, who put it up on the web because they want to share it on certain terms.
So we wanted to create a simple way for creators to say to the world, here's the freedom that I want to run with my creative work. Here are the things you're allowed to do.
Can I reproduce it? Can I copy it? Can I put it in my textbook? Can I use that photograph? Can I make a new version of it?
Creative Commons gives tools to creators to make a choice about copyright.
Creative Commons license can cover anything that copyright covers.
Every license says, you need to give me attribution. I created this, give me credit for the work I did.
The basic choices are commercial use or not. Can you make derivative works, versions, adaptations, or not? And do you want me to have to share alike? So if I take your stuff, do I have to offer it to the next person under the same terms?
There's no requirement for you to do anything with your work other than what you want to do. You own the copyright to it. What we've done is given you the right to exercise your copyright in more ways, more simply.
So the idea here is to enable that creative impulses that the technology turns loose and get the law out of the way.
The work of Creative Commons is really about laying the infrastructure groundwork for this new type of culture, a new kind of folk culture.
Somebody from Delhi, somebody from New York, somebody from Singapore
can feel comfortable using a photo that was created and given away by someone in the United States or in China or wherever that the licenses have been extended to.
with their identity being preserved.
Which means that people can actually create new kinds of things, come together and build things.
Mashups that people can do with people's Flickr photos.
And CC Mixter has allowed artists to make music together.
It's really about creativity and connection.
Access and control.
From amateurs who simply, for the love of what they're doing and they want to share it and they want other people to be able to make use of it, to commercial organizations.
In the end, this will have a very successful place in the for-profit economy.
Creative Commons is the bridge to this future. Is you got to move away from thinking about content to thinking about communities. Communities that develop around content, and the sharing that the licenses allow enable these communities to come together.
A physical commons is like a park where anybody can enter equally. A commons with intellectual works is actually much freer.
It really is going to be the pillar for communications between people, cultural exchange.
The space for more speech, more free expression.
And that's the kind of commons we're trying to create.
So this gives a nice, I think, overview of Creative Commons, the big picture of why it was created. As I go into a little bit of the presentation, it'd be great to just get a sense of the audience. How many folks here are familiar with Creative Commons? And then how many have actually licensed a work under Creative Commons? Okay, so we have a good crowd. So we have, as we go through this, I'll do just a little bit of background for those of you who are new to Creative Commons, but at the same time be diving into some of the issues and certainly talking about the power of the open and the creators who are here that we're celebrating. This I see as kind of the beginning of Creative Commons. This was the landscape that started in 2001. The legal infrastructure for copyright in this country has long been established, but yet the internet had been created. Media and technology are out there, and we hadn't yet figured out a way to bridge the two. And a way to bridge the two was Creative Commons, and we didn't know exactly where the landscape would take us, but we knew there was a gap. And there was a gap between people who were creating content and assets and wanted to share them freely on the internet, but didn't have that capability because they didn't know how to license the materials. And copyright automatically put everything under lockdown. So what about those who wanted to share in some ways that they weren't able to? And that's where Creative Commons stepped in. Here we are about 10 years later, and we've begun to create an infrastructure. And when we talk about Creative Commons, we talk about both the political, the technical infrastructure, and the legal infrastructure as well. There's really these underlying layers that are critically important to then build the opportunities for the free culture movement to use a Creative Commons license, for educators to use the Creative Commons license, as well as to think about it in open data, to think about it in science as well. And having this infrastructure is really just to facilitate the transfer of knowledge, to make sure we all understand what we're doing when we create materials or assets, and it gives us all the choices to share in ways that we choose. This is to just show a little bit about the overarching kind of reach that we've been able to have over 10 years. Our affiliates, we have over 100. Our affiliates are all volunteers. They're judges, lawyers, they're policymakers, they're advocates for Creative Commons in countries around the world who believe in the Creative Commons mission. They take their time to both evangelize for Creative Commons in their local area, as well as to translate or to help port the license to each local country. We do have memorandum of understandings with each of the affiliates, and it's been ported now over to 70 countries. And this is really part of the power of Creative Commons, because in the world of global exchange, in the world of the web and the internet, we know information is freely floating, and it's clearly not just staying within the United States. If I want to use an asset from the UK, what is my rights to be able to do that if it's licensed under an open agreement? And so I'd just like to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think we've been able to create and some of the problems we've been able to address with having open licensing, in particular having Creative Commons licensing. So one is it reduces the friction and the cost. So right away, people know that if I create, and I tend to use examples from education because I have an education background and was formerly a teacher, and I've really worked in the area of open educational resources as my base. And when I think about, first of all, open educational resources, it's always been that Creative Commons is the engine that powers it, right? It is the absolute fundamental baseline that we need to make sure it happens. And one of the things it does is it reduces friction. So if I want to share my asset, if I create a lesson plan and want to share this asset with others, I've created it for myself, I use it in my classroom, I use it for my students, I've spent 10, 15, 20 hours. No one has to go back and recreate. I would guess that this could be useful to someone else. And someone could take my lesson plan and actually go through it, review it, and think about some really innovative ways, and then take it and share it again. And in many ways, this reduces the friction. It also reduces the friction of, if I want to find something and see if I can actually find the lesson plan, but I Google it I put it on Google, but I'm not really sure, can I take it? Can I republish it? Can I add it to a textbook? I really don't know how. So there's transaction costs that get reduced because there isn't as much friction in the internet. There's also these kind of transaction costs that I talk about, that just finding something or trying to share something, there's huge transaction costs when someone wants to use your photo, if it might be a photo. And you might say, when people find you, they say, hey, you know what, go ahead and use it. Put it in that brochure, use it for a poster. I created it. My joy was in creating it. For me particularly, anyone can use it anyway. But no one can actually legally do that unless they know that that photo is openly licensed. And so how do we communicate that with the broader community? Again, it creates efficiency and reduces redundancy. We don't have to create again and again and again. What we want to do is actually add to what's been created, right? That's the power of the knowledge. That's the power of what's being brought to fruition in many aspects of our society and our culture. Music gets remixed. Photos can get reused. In education, we don't have to create algebra, 50 versions of algebra in every state in this country. Algebra is pretty much algebra, which is algebra. And you can add on, but you could add interesting things. You could add algebra, you could add games for kids. You can add interesting videos, right? But some of the redundancy that we have in the system can certainly be reduced. And also, clearly, the assets are dynamic. They can be used again and again. They don't have to stay in their static state. They can continue to build and evolve. They can move from place to place. They can travel well. And in that way of being dynamic, they live on. They live on in new and different ways. The original asset can be held in the same texture that it was created, but then we can also add to it and change it in ways that are really important. And particularly as we think about dissemination and knowledge, and we think about how we actually move information from one place to another, scale is really important. And it's really hard to gather the knowledge out of someone's head or the expertise if they want to share it. I know that certainly in the government, in the nonprofit sector, we have lots of knowledge, and it tends to sit in people's heads. It tends to sit in reports that tend to sit on shelves. It's really hard to share this information. And then what happens again is we have redundancy in programs or projects or data as another example. Data gets collected and then it gets locked down. No one can reanalyze that data. No one can add to that data set. No one can do another time period of exploration with that data. And that becomes really difficult because we really aren't using our efficiencies well. So here we just look at the take-up of Creative Commons license over the past, since 2003, when we were tracking the data, up to 400 million assets that we've been able to document. This is considered a very conservative estimate. And we can also look at the change between those that were licensed under either Creative Commons by or by share alike, or the public domain, which means they're least restrictive, and how that's grown over time. Certainly one of the things that we've learned, while we have the option for people to put licenses out under non-commercial, and there is a place and a purpose for that, it does tend to become more difficult for it to interoperate with other content down the line, and so it sometimes doesn't have the distribution or impact that people want to have. But we have these multiple licenses. This is clearly a take-up, and we can see it over time. So if you do want to license your work, you can go to the Creative Commons website, and there's instructions for you to follow. Essentially, you can just, pretty easy questions to answer. Do you want to allow commercial uses of your work or not? Again, you choose as the creator. Do you want to allow people to modify it, or do you want to just keep it the way it is and let people distribute it? And then it goes on in the jurisdiction. So you collect a little bit of information and try to make it as simple as possible. And one of the innovations is really that what's important is that it's machine readable, it's human readable, and there's also legal code. And these three layers are critically important as the work moves ahead. So the machine readable allows the metadata to be found by search engines. And this way, the end users, can search and actually find what your particular material or asset might be. It's also, we have a human readable deed, so those of us in the room who aren't lawyers can read it, which would include me. And so you know what rights you're giving up, so you have a very understandable way of understanding what's happening. And then there's a legal code, which is long and a little bit detailed and tedious, but some of the lawyers just love that. And it has stood up in court in many countries throughout the world. So it is something that's really critically important. So we're here tonight celebrating the power of open. And one of the things that we've learned is that we have these incredible people distributed throughout the globe who have used the Creative Commons license in really incredible and effective ways. The license is really an enabler of innovation and creativity. We didn't know how people would use it down the road, but what we wanted to do is make sure we had that opportunity for people to do that. For people to do it in different ways, as individuals, as artists, as photographers, but also people, institutions, and also districts and governments to think about the Creative Commons license. And so we've been told many times in some ways the story isn't getting out really effectively enough. Why don't we put together a book where we can share the stories of these artists and creators, and we're fortunate to have several with us tonight that we'll hear more about. And so this is the book. It's available for copies for folks who want them here. There are also PDF versions. It's being translated into multiple languages, and so if you want to let your friends know about it, it'd be terrific to do as well. So I'm going to give a little bit of a teaser of the book to tell a few of the stories and some of the power of the situations that have been created, and then you can delve in more, both in the book and then some of the other information that you can find on our website. So Sita Sings the Blues is been created by Nina Polly. She is a young filmmaker in New York. She was trying to figure out and get this particular video she had created out into the world. It was very, very difficult. She was having a hard time with some of the music that she had used that was copyrighted. She was spending a lot of money on legal fees. She didn't have that money to do it. She started searching around and had heard about open source. She began to dig in to try to figure out what open source and how did that happen and how was there a sustainable model with it. And she kind of stumbled into the Creative Commons license. And what she did is begin to innovate around the Creative Commons license. And so what eventually happened is her video did get put out. She did put it out under Creative Commons by license. It was also, she created a DVD, which she sold for $5. She created T-shirts. The distribution was phenomenal for her. She got her message out in a way that she would have never been able to before. And for her, a young, struggling artist, it really became a revenue source and a moneymaker for her to continue to stay in the Creative Commons world. This is a story that was in a Wired blog. It's by the group 9 Inch Nails album. Again, they were trying to think about innovative ways to how do we think about this new distribution of music in the marketplace. And what they did is they used the Creative Commons license on one of their songs, which then they put out. It was broadly picked up by fans. They became known everywhere. But then what they said, hey, but if you want to buy the album, you have to pay $5. Well, not too bad, but they had incredible take-up on the album at $5, and then they made a specialty some sort of specialty brand with the album and some signed signatures and this and that. They sold them for like $250. They had a limited edition of 2,500. They sold them out very quickly. They became known, and they became strong advocates of the Creative Commons license. And so this is kind of the territory we're all in. We don't know what the outcomes will be, but we have these innovators and creators and people who are willing to jump in and say, I believe in the sharing. I want to let my fans know. I want to create this knowledge or these attributes for others to see, and we want to definitely get the message out. Al Jazeera is a very interesting example. It was the first news organization to pick up the Creative Commons by license. They have a video repository of footage with the Creative Commons by. And this has been really interesting because it's been picked up and reused in many places, particularly in this part of the world, in the Middle East, with all that is happening. The distribution happens very quickly. They can get the word out, what's happening locally and on the ground, and it's really gained incredible branding, which is interesting for Al Jazeera. So as you think about this, we always had a different way of branding. One thing that's really important is you have to protect your brand. You don't know how the brand's going to be used, and so we hesitate. We want to control the brand. But they've actually used the openness of the internet and the openness of the license to let more people know about them, and their brand has been picked up. And so this has been kind of a change in the ecosystem as we think about it moving ahead, about how brands get recognized. The Brooklyn Museum has adopted the Creative Commons license. They've adopted it around some of their work of arts. They've also done a competition, which was really interesting, to bring in some of the outside players to think about the museum and its work overall. And again, this has been a pretty interesting space for them as they think about ways to kind of change, again, their distribution and how they think kind of about the lockdown and the proprietary of artists' work. Fiat's an interesting example. This is Fiat, the car maker out of Brazil. And they wanted to, they were innovating about what the next new car should look like. And they were sitting with their engineers trying to think about this. And someone came up with the idea of, well, why don't we put a license? Why don't we put out a competition, like an RFP, and have people give us their ideas? We only have a certain skill set that sits within this organization, but boy, if we crowdsource, what would happen? And so they put this competition out to say, hey, send us your ideas about what the coolest new car would be. What would its features be? What would it look like? And within a very short period of time, they had over 2,000 ideas that they had infused into the system. They made it known that these ideas would be shareable. All the ideas were going to be created, would be put out under a Creative Commons by license. And so not only has Fiat and its engineers been able to tap this wisdom, which they then put together this model car from it, but they also share the ideas with the broader industry. So these ideas are shared with all automobile makers. They can use the ideas and tap them. Anyone can go through and see what they want. But again, knowledge has been created. It's not locked down. People can take it, and you can bring it back to your home institution and use it in really creative and innovative ways. For them to think about how they would actually be able to get this kind of knowledge, for them, even though they're a for-profit organization, as they think about it, this was a really incredible way for them to tap incredible expertise and knowledge that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And so that was really quite innovative. The Architecture for Humanity designs homes, particularly in areas of the world which are quite poor. And what they do is they actually put out the designs under a Creative Commons by license, so people in different parts of the world can use some of the innovative, low-cost, scalable ways to build homes for many of the people in this world who don't have homes. And they've been very important both in the Haiti earthquake and the Japan earthquake as well. And again, it's about how in different parts of the world we can use some of the innovation and the spread of information to be far more efficient and effective than we've been able to do ourselves. YouTube is just a part of a story I want to tell you about Creative Commons. Many of you may know that a few weeks ago, YouTube adopted, in partnership, the Creative Commons license. So this was really, really exciting for us, and I think this is really beginning to show how we're moving from the early adopters really into the mainstream with the use of open licensing. So now, if you were to upload a video into YouTube, you see their standard YouTube agreement around licensing, but they also have the Creative Commons option where you can opt in under Creative Commons by license so that other people will know and share. And so for us, this is a huge win. We think we'll really be able to get the word out, certainly with YouTube, which everyone knows. And it's really just a terrific way for people to, again, to begin to understand. If you're going to share it on YouTube, well, you can also share it as a Creative Commons, and other people can take your asset and remix it in ways that are really innovative and creative, and you'll probably really enjoy. In the science area, the Personal Genome Project is one that's really important, where they really had the scientists and volunteers work together to share data around the Genome Project. And what's really important to this is far more information is being able to be collected in a far quicker and more efficient way, and this data is being used for research purposes right away to try to figure out some of the cures for some of the most important and pressing illnesses that we have in this country and around the world. Jonathan Coulton is an interesting case. He loves Creative Commons. I mean, we have these champions who are all over the world. He gets traffic, more donations, and more fans, and he's, again, been able to distribute. People talk about, well, what happens with, the licensing, or if you're a musician? Well, not that many people knew Jonathan Coulton before, but now he's developed a fan base, and people know him. And people like Madonna may not need the Creative Commons license, but Jonathan has a way to create branding, recognition, reputation by using it and really distributing quite broadly. Those of you in the education space know the Khan Academy. It has amazing short video assets that are available online freely, again, to anyone to use. And it's been taken up. It's one of the most hit education websites. And again, it's kind of taken this idea of openness, but also teasing the very short snippets of education instead of just reproducing the textbook and putting it online, or texting, or creating a long video lecture. It's really just small, short segments for people to use, and I know kids are using them, targeted mostly at middle and high school. Bloomsbury Academy Academic has actually used the Creative Commons license. They work in the humanities and social sciences. They create research, and with them they've always had a lockdown model of selling their publishing articles and books. They decided to try the Creative Commons license to see if it would have a negative impact, and lo and behold, it didn't. It actually had a positive impact. They give some of the, you can access the Creative Commons materials, but you can also buy a print copy. Many, many people, we've heard the story again and again, that if you actually make it freely available and people can find it and flip through it, sometimes we all want a print copy because it can be hard, or you want to share it, or you want to mark it up, or whatever you might want to do with it. And again, this is how they've kind of been able to actually increase their revenue model while keeping true to their mission overall. Our world is United Nations, and again, this is an environmental system. The UNU, United Nations University, has open courseware, again, where they're creating content. Under the mission of United Nations is really to spread the information and knowledge. Again, why lock it up? Let's put it out there, let people to build on top of it, let's share it, and again, lower the transaction costs and the friction. Here I just want to talk quickly about a project that we've been working on, which will ultimately, hopefully, impact the Google, Yahoo, and Bing, which is really around search. So one of the big issues on the internet, as we all know, if you look on the web, it can be a place of chaos. It can be really hard to find the gem that you want to find. And so search and discovery can be, particularly in the education space, but in other spaces, it can be really hard to find that asset that you can really use. And we can use trusted resources, but we still don't have quite an efficient manner to do that. There's something that's called schema.org, which was just released 2 years ago, which is about a metadata project. So it's really creating the metadata standards for different industries. In the education space, Creative Commons is working with the American Education Publishers in partnership to actually set up the metadata framework for learning in education space. So we will be hosting a technical panel. We'll be having a very open and transparent process over the next 6 to 12 months. It's been funded by both the Gates Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation to try to actually address this problem of search and discovery. And again, as we work in partnership, it isn't just for openness, it's for the end user to be able to find whatever they want. Whether they find something that they want to pay a fee for, whether they find something that they want for free. It doesn't really matter, but they need the tools to make it happen. And so in working on this project, the idea is to really be able to create that metadata and to really streamline the process, again, to create efficiencies. Just since we're here in Washington, I have to show this slide about the White House. It's a Flickr photo under Creative Commons license, but they also use the Creative Commons license on their website so that the content, again, is freely open. So we're beginning to see significant take-up. Here I just want to mention a project which I've been talking about with different groups I've been meeting today, and not everyone was aware of it. It's called the Trade Adjustment Assistance community college and career training program or initiative. It's $2 billion that have been released jointly by the Department of Labor and the Department of Education. This is funding under President Obama's Workforce Retraining Initiative, and it's funding to go out to the states and to the community colleges to develop materials to help retrain and promote workforce efficiencies. Any material, it's being distributed in 4 waves, $500 million in each wave. The first wave has been released. Grant applications have been solicited, and they're undergoing a review process right now. But what's important for the Creative Commons world is that anything that's created under these federal funds, so taxpayer dollars, is going to be used for materials. It will be required to have a Creative Commons by license. So any of the materials that are created, any of the training goods that are created, again, will have a Creative Commons by license. This will allow others to take this content and to use it and to rebuild it if they want in different ways. It will allow actually the for-profit world, because it's Creative Commons by, if they can add value, if they can think of some creative ways to add value to it, will be really important. And as we think of future waves of this funding in year 2, year 3, and year 4, it allows actually this content and materials that are created in the first year to be improved upon again and again. So again, it isn't static. It's much more dynamic, and it's usually really quite a, I think, a significant mark in the open licensing movement that we've been able to get to this point and to really see the take-up on this overall. And again, so now we will have community colleges all across the country who will be adopting the Creative Commons license, and then hopefully not just for this particular grant project, but they'll begin to build it into their institution to see it for the larger scene. We just want to make sure there are acknowledgments. It's been a huge kind of journey to get to this point in time, and Eric Stewart and Lisa Green are 2 Creative Commons staff who have been critical, as well as David Kindler, who I wanted to make sure I mentioned. But also, what this is, it's about the artists. Because if we created these licenses, if we created the technology, if people didn't believe in it and apply it and take a chance in some of the stories that you'll hear today, it wouldn't matter. And what it does matter is that actually people are being innovative and creative and stepping on to the next arena. With this Power of Open, because it is a global story, we're having launch events throughout the world. The one in Tokyo was 2 weeks ago. The event in Brussels is probably finished before this one, but we're, I guess, in 3rd place. And then Rio de Janeiro, London, and Paris. After that, we'll actually be taking it on the road. We have many affiliates in many countries who will be developing salons in different places of the world to tell the stories. And we'll be having, Creative Commons will be having our meeting in Warsaw, our global meeting in Warsaw in September, and we will be translating it into Polish as well. So here I'd just like to end with a sign about the public footpath, the importance of a commons, the importance of everyone contributing to the commons, and whatever organization you're with, either you individually or the organization you work for, I really urge you to explore the Creative Commons license. I'm happy I'll be here after to talk with you and others from our staff about it and the potential. But this is a way for us to, whatever we do and whatever we create and the knowledge we share, to make sure it actually has the largest impact. And I know I lived in DC for a few years after I was a teacher in Jamaica right after college, and then I said it was my blood had thinned too much. I couldn't move back to the Northeast, so I stopped in DC for a few years. And you want to be here because you want to have an impact. And the people who are here because of the policy influences, because this is the hub of this country. And this can be a place where you can really make a difference and where we can have collectively this downwind multiplier effect, which is so critical. With that, feel free to reproduce, recopy, remix this PowerPoint and to use it to your advantage. Thank you.
This is the chairs get put on the screen. Everyone should come up. We'll move to the next stage. Thank you, Kathleen. And as someone who got a call a few months ago saying we're launching this book and it hasn't been written yet, I'm as pleased as you are that we're here live today with a book in hand. So please come up and Cathy, you want to be here? Heather, if you should the bar.
That one? Okay. All right. Okay.
So thank you all for coming. And we've got 4 voices here who can illuminate different aspects of the story of Creative Commons. I want to start with Heather. You work at IntraHealth, and when I, first sort of heard about you as a person, I was like, Creative Commons health. Where's the nexus? And as we've talked, there's an interesting story there. I'd like you to perhaps share that, if you could.
Well, I work for IntraHealth International. It's a large global health organization, and we support health workers in the developing world. And I oversee what's called the IntraHealth Open Initiative, and that's a project that is trying to build local capacity in open source technology in Africa and around the world, so that we can have local health workers, local developers who are building and creating and sharing just in the same way, but in this case, not just for art, though I love art, but to save lives.
But there was some art involved, and I think there was some art left on the table of swag as you come in the door. So can you explain that?
Well, I can't seem to do nonprofit things without getting art involved in them somehow. And we thought when we were doing this project that to explain to global health people and media people what open source was, this was a few years back, people weren't as familiar with it, that we would do something easier, and we would do a remix with music. So instead of using code and technology, we would use tracks and music. And so we went to Youssou N'Dour, who's a West African wonderful Grammy-winning singer, and we asked him if he'd give us a song, and he immediately said, yes, I'd be happy to, because his last album was called Yoko, which means connectivity, and he really believes in this message. But then we had to convince Warner Music and Nonsuch that we wanted to use these tracks, make them available. Yeah, we did. It took a while. Wow. Some charming and convincing and pleading and persuading, which is what I usually call my job. And we did talk them into it because we explained what it was for. And so we released a whole bunch of tracks of this song. Every single track, there were actually about 72 on this one song. And we said, anyone around the world could use these. And we would lead it by having rock stars get involved with it. So we had Nas and some of the R.E.M. guys and Duncan Sheik and a bunch of other African stars come in and make remixes of a song called Wake Up, It's Africa Calling. And they did beautiful versions, but then we made them make their versions available to others too. And we did a global remix contest with Indaba Music. And we had about 500 entries from over 30 countries, and a group from Mali won the best remix.
So you've got an ethic of open source within the organization. You've got Creative Commons was a sort of entry point. How have the two, how's the first leaked into the second? Because I'm just intrigued. Open source is a different way of working.
Right.
And
we believe in open source because what ends up happening is that even though it's expensive, and we talked about this earlier, if open source is free, like a free puppy is free, you end up spending money on it. But we believe...
I asked her to repeat that.
I like that one.
But we believe if you spend the money locally and the money is going to build local capacity, then the innovation that you get out of it is so much more valuable for your dollar. So we have developed some of our own open source tools for health, and those would be about human resource information systems. We work with people doing medical record systems and mapping, reminders for community health workers, literacy, education, as well as devices. That's another question I have for Creative Commons. Can we get into the devices discussion? Because we have open prosthetics that are being invented where they're putting designer code online for people to build things with local materials.
So that may be a question for Cathy in a minute. But I'll mention during the Wine and Cheese, we will have both images and sound, including some of the remix tracks, as we drink wine. Rebecca, you come at this as a news reporter, and the two questions, there's two aspects. One, I know you've been involved in Creative Commons in Hong Kong, but you also started co-founding Global Voices, and I'll talk with you, share a little bit about that experience of Creative Commons.
Well, actually, Global Voices is one of the stories in the book. Through the voice of Solana Larson, our managing editor. So I encourage you to read that as well. But basically, the story is that I used to work for CNN and got fascinated by the internet. It's actually Joey Ito's fault. He's the former CEO of Creative Commons and currently the chairman of the board, I think, still.
Chair of the board.
I was CNN's bureau chief in Tokyo, and I met Joey there, and he was one of the people that got me very fascinated in all of this. Anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up at Harvard blogging and as a fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, just trying to experiment in sort of what does citizen media and online citizen journalism mean for the future of international news. And of course, Ethan Zuckerman, who is an Africanist and technologist, was also a fellow there. And he and I kept having these conversations about, there are all these amazing bloggers around the world, in the Middle East and Africa. This was 2004, and it was when people were really starting to get going globally with blogging, talking about what was happening in their countries. But the big problem is that, of course, how does anybody find these people unless they already know where to look? Googling for blogs, especially then, but even now, unless you know what you're looking for, it's very hard. Who's the most credible set of bloggers in Lebanon that you should be following? Where to even go to ask this question? And so anyway, to make a long story short again, we ended up sort of consulting with a bunch of bloggers around the world who we had been following and launched this little sort of experimental site that ended up growing and becoming what we call Global Voices, which basically curates. So we have people, we have a Middle East, North Africa editor who curates what are the blogs in her region talking about every day and every week, and she brings in volunteers from the different countries. So we've got people in Egypt curating, what's coming off of social media in Egypt today, this week. And so, of course, Tunisia, et cetera, et cetera. We also have people doing more advocacy, free speech-oriented work, looking at, what are the challenges to free expression online in different countries, how to get around censorship, putting out information. And so anyway, we started from the very beginning. We did the site with a Creative Commons license because the whole point of the site was that we wanted to be able to share our content. We wanted people to be able to, reproduce it on their blogs or on their websites as long as they linked back to us and gave us credit for where it came from. We wanted as many people as possible to be aware of what bloggers around the world were talking about. We were a nonprofit. The point was not a commercial one, right. The purpose. And then very interesting things started coming out of that we hadn't expected, right? So in 2005, I discovered there was this guy in Taiwan who was translating a lot of our content into Chinese and putting it on his blog. And since it was Creative Commons and he knew what Creative Commons was, and understood that meant that nobody was going to go after him. And in Taiwan, actually, a lot of news organizations go after bloggers who republish, commercial news content. So, and he was frustrated. Why was he doing this? He was doing this because he was frustrated that the local media in Taiwan doesn't cover the developing world adequately. And he felt that our site actually had a lot of great information and material coming from citizen media in the developing world that he thought should be shared in Chinese with people in his community. So he had just kind of taken it upon himself to start doing this. And it was because our content was licensed Creative Commons that he felt this was no problem to do. And kind of since then, we've developed a whole project called Project Lingua. We've got a couple different, more than 24 languages where people are just translating our content back and forth, from, very well-known languages like Arabic and Portuguese and Chinese to Malagasy and a number and Bangla and some other lesser-known languages where there's not a lot of good international news content locally, and so there are communities springing up who find this very valuable to be able to translate it like that. So anyway, again, because we are a nonprofit citizen media organization, and because the whole purpose of our organization is not to generate advertising revenue, but rather to try and address an information imbalance that we see in the world, that if you're from the developed West, your voice is much more likely to be heard in the media than if you're from the developing world, or if you're kind of on the wrong side of the stick in an authoritarian country or something like that. So the whole point is to help amplify voices of people who might not otherwise so easily get heard. So Creative Commons, of course, makes perfect sense.
Great. I mean, it's an amazing story. If you haven't seen the site, globalvoices.net.
Yeah, globalvoicesonline.org.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, somebody else got globalvoices.com. They do translations. They're commercial. Anyway.
Yeah. So, but
globalvoicesonline.org.
Maybe they don't use CC, but
no, they don't.
So, turning to you, Sherwin, you work for Public Knowledge, leading organization in DC working on copyright issues. You are their deputy legal director, and as a lawyer, you probably think differently from everyone else. My wife's a lawyer. It's okay.
I see. Okay.
What?
I'm not noticed on
I
lawyers.
did like the fact that you have the machine readable, the human readable, and the lawyer readable.
So, it's a question of easy and difficult sharing, I think, here. That for me, CC is about easy sharing. And can you perhaps talk a little bit about that? And I know you've worked with some workshops of musicians as well. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of the things. I mean, people have asked, what Creative Commons does that fair use can't, and things like that. And in these workshops with musicians, every now and then, we give a primer on copyright law and talk about sort of, the rights that it conveys to artists, and that, these are their rights to control, and so on and so forth, and go through some of the issues of the day and some of the controversies. And a question that we get every now and then is, well, what if I want to copyright my work, or what if I want to Creative Commons it, as raising this as sort of a dichotomy, this idea that this is one of two paths you can go down. And I'm sure it's something that at Public Knowledge we argue for balanced copyright, and so every now and then people accuse us of being anti-copyright. I'm sure that for Creative Commons people it can be frustrating to see their licenses and their work, which builds on and relies upon copyright, to be held up as a contrast to it. But in a way, that's almost a victory, in that musicians, independent musicians in Rochester or Syracuse or wherever, know about Creative Commons and have an idea as to how it works, but also that people are cognizant of the fact that copyright law, that as an artist, copyright law isn't one of these issues where the more is necessarily the better, where there is a lot of nuance in how they want to manage their control over their works, and that Creative Commons is a way for them to do that.
And these artists, have you got any anecdotes from them, or do you just deal with the legal stuff and then let them go off?
Well, no, it's not. It's not like we're giving them legal advice so much as giving them an idea of what copyright law is, and sort of how it's meant to promote creation, and how it's meant to encourage not just monetary gains for writing a song or writing a book, but also to encourage that spread, and that they have these very powerful tools that if they don't want to hire a legal department and have a licensing department, they can, by themselves, make that choice on what trade-offs they want between monetization and distribution.
Okay, that's good. So, Cathy, there's the open question of copyright on things, which I think we've got might get into patents and require Sherwin to come back into the discussion. But I was going to ask you a little bit, and you may want to take up that question, but about education and its impact to date on education. You've had a long background in education, and where you see where you think we are on that development and leveraging of these ideas. Are we just past the starting gate, or are there some really solid examples out there?
I think looking at the curve and the take-up, you see that obviously you want it to continue. I think what we saw, particularly in education, there was we seeded a lot of ideas to see what traction would hold. We heard an incredible thirst from both in the United States and various innovations and around the world, particularly in the developing world, who both wanted to share their cultural knowledge, but also to be able to build on others. So there's a two-way, clearly, exchange. And then I think there was a little bit of a lull because we almost didn't know where to go next with it, but then the economy really tanked. And what I say, unfortunately, that this was good for open educational resources, which is not what I want the economy to come back, don't misconstrue me, but that because of, in tough times, particularly in tough education times, we have districts, we have schools, we have higher education across the nation, in this country and across the world who are making hard choices about where they're making decisions and where they're spending the assets in education. And in hard times, you look to create something new, you look to innovate. When things are going well, it's really only a few of the early adopters who are really going to be out on that cliff and jump off. And what I think we have really seen, particularly with this Department of Labor, Department of Education Act, in these tough times when community colleges, with which 47% of students in this country attend a community college for higher education, they pay more for textbooks than they pay for their tuition fees. And it becomes prohibitive for people, the school of last choice, to become the choice that they want to endure. That's why these institutions were built. The world is changing. We now have online education, which again is going to be part of this player. But there is a question about how education assets, materials are used, what kind of efficiencies we have, how we can become more efficient in these very tight times, and how we can innovate in ways that are really important. So what I think we're seeing, particularly with Creative Commons, not just in education, but globally, is we are at an inflection point. There is a lot of conversation about openness and transparency in science and data in education, again, in culture. It continues. And I think what we're seeing is we're crossing over from the very early adopters, which you see that spike typically is, and then there's a chasm to get over to the mainstream, right? This is what Clay Christensen calls disruptive theory. And so you have to actually come in with early adopters and create some of these case studies, and then you can actually get traction to cross into the mainstream. And I think we're really at that very critical point of crossing into the mainstream. And what's really important is that we continue to have the growth and we don't have setbacks that then just keep us in kind of an isolated pocket overall.
That's great. Moving from a question, I'm going to go to audience questions in a couple of minutes. Rebecca, I'm thinking we've looked at education. If we think about Creative Commons around the world, you were involved in the launch in Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, yeah.
The legal structures in Hong Kong are probably pretty different. I've got no familiarity with them. Can you explain how that got launched? And I know you've been out of Hong Kong for a few years now, but some stories from there.
Yeah, I was teaching at the University of Hong Kong for 2 years, teaching journalism, and it was sort of like Joey was like, oh, well, why don't you help us launch, CC in Hong Kong while you're there? And me being a sucker, but
it's a little side project.
yeah, one of your many side projects. How about that? But no, I mean, but it turned out, of course, there's a community of very active Wikipedians in Hong Kong who were really eager to have Creative Commons launched in Hong Kong because Wikipedia uses Creative Commons license, of course. There was a group of educators who concerned about the textbook kind of industry in Hong Kong is very influential, and teachers concerned about inability to share and copy and distribute things without costing everybody way too much money. There were some lower income parents, of course, concerned about costs of educational materials and textbooks. Artists, there's a public broadcaster in Hong Kong, RTHK, with all this archival footage they wanted to put online, and how to handle the rights issues there. So there were a lot of groups in Hong Kong who were kind of eager to have this. And she at one point put a slide up there with lots of different flags. The way it works is that you have to take the license, code, the legal code, the lawyer-readable code, and translate it into the legalese of the particular jurisdiction, so that when there are legal disputes about, this musician is using, if somebody's violating the license or there's some question, people can actually go to court and get a ruling. That's the whole point. So we took a year working with 2 law professors at the University of Hong Kong who specialize in local copyright law. And Hong Kong, it's part of China, but long story short, it's a completely separate legal system, and so their copyright law is kind of a hybrid of British and American copyright law, more heavily British than American, but it's its own little, with a few other things borrowed from other places. So they had to, spend a year making sure that this was kosher and that it would hold up. And we had a community consultation process, consulted with the local IP community, had to meet with people in government, let them know this was coming, et cetera, so that there would be no problems. So it was really an involved process. And then, of course, the whole issue of promoting it, which is difficult, I think, for a lot of local CC communities, because it's nonprofit and sort of the local organizations need to sort of raise money, and some get funding, some don't really, and so on. But it's now ported into Hong Kong local law. So on that drop-down menu, when you pick your jurisdiction, you can put the license there. And so, in terms of uptake, it's always an uphill battle, because I think particularly in East Asia, where the U.S. Trade Representative has been very aggressive in trying to get local copyright laws, sort of into line with what they want. And basically, it's basically written by the American Chamber of Commerce and, so on. Here's what we want you to do with your copyright law. And so there's a lot of concern about, are we going to be encouraging young people to steal music if we endorse Creative Commons, and what's this going to do, and so on. So there's a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of concern that we're promoting, that we're anti-copyright, right? So we had to do a lot of work on that score to say, no, we're not anti-copyright, we're about choice. Right. Time Warner wants to sell their stuff, great, fabulous. This doesn't have anything to do with that. This is to provide, people who want to share anyway. Activists, NGOs, citizen media groups who want their content, teachers who want their content to be shared. It's the low-hanging fruit. We want to enable the low-hanging fruit to get out there, and also provide young people with legal alternatives that they don't need to pay for, and so that they don't have to go ripping off the proprietary material. And I also found with journalism students as well, that students oftentimes don't understand that they can't just take photos off the New York Times website and stick it in their story, and again, different countries are different, but in Asia sometimes you see issues where people who write politically controversial stuff, they're vulnerable, of course, to having their material censored, particularly if they mess up with copyright. And so I found actually that this was a very important thing to tell my students in Hong Kong, that look, you really have to be careful that, especially if you're doing investigative reporting, that you're not going to get caught on copyright grounds, and making sure that you use a Creative Commons photo rather than just whatever you find out there. It's really important you do that, and people just haven't thought about that.
And that's part of just media literacy that we need for the youth as part of this country.
Yeah.
And just before the final question for Heather, before we move to Q&A, Africa remixing health and Creative Commons, how much traction have you found? I mean, you're really taking this out across the world. How far has it got so far?
I think it's, you were talking earlier about branding and this idea that it's proprietary can make this feel scary, but actually if you go open and go sharing, you can go viral. And in our world, there's a very different kind of viral. And it's a very critical kind of viral. And yet we still want the same thing. We want to get these tools and these learning and sharing tools, everything we can, as fast as we can out into the field. And Creative Commons actually helps you do that much faster than going through the other portals that you might have to be sent through. So that's one thing. It's faster and it's more efficient and it's freer and it just feels better. And so that's something that we're seeing happen. There's a crossover here and maybe different discussion between exactly what's Creative Commons, what's open source licensing, but we're doing both, and we're seeing people be very comfortable with that kind of licensing.
Okay. And so we have a microphone in the middle of the room. Those who'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. The gentleman in the middle on the right, to you. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Dave Witzel from Environmental Defense Fund. And I had a couple of questions for Cathy. Congratulations on the new position.
Thank you.
Should be fun.
I'm planning on it.
So we're working with businesses to try to find ways to make businesses more environmentally sustainable, and kicking around the notion of a sustainability commons kind of as a platform that maybe we could deploy if we could have sharing amongst businesses. And so 2 questions for you. One is kind of what are you know, broadly, what are we seeing as the experience of business around Creative Commons? Are you seeing any uptake? What's the chatter? And then specifically, is Creative Commons going to continue to be involved in patenting and the green exchange experience?
Okay, so 2 good questions. And the business take-up, I think what we have a fair amount of case studies, individual exemplars, some of which you'll read in the book, some of which you can also find on the Creative Commons site. I do think there are some businesses, and they tend to be the more innovative, edgy businesses, so I think the environmental work is a great ground for that, who are willing to explore new models. Some models are being built purely on Creative Commons and open licensing materials, and some of them are just kind of stealth and underway, and I think we'll see them shortly. So I think there is this whole adoption of exploration of what's happening. I don't think we've hit any wall at all. I think really actually that open wall, that open plane I showed is very true, I think, particularly in the business community. And I think that there are little innovations. And one of the things I was just talking today as I was meeting with a number of groups is really the idea that sometimes with businesses to think about jumping whole hog into Creative Commons can be really, really scary, because this is their livelihood. They have a business model, they have employees, you know, people have to live, they have to eat, and so you can't just throw it to the wind. You have to be responsible. But I think what we found time and time again in the education space, even in business-like organizations, that if they test the waters with a Creative Commons license, they have found amazing results. And typically in every pilot, and actually I don't know a pilot that's been pulled back in 10 years, if they tested the idea, usually there was incredible take-up or other positive consequences that they couldn't have even thought about when they were building the project that happened. And so my encouragement would be for businesses to explore some of these models, to take a chance and do something in some piloted ways, things that either are shelf sometimes or don't have a huge distribution. Take a risk, because I think you will find the benefit. And then the other question is, I think, around knowledge sharing and how businesses are thinking about knowledge sharing. And Joel Thurston's here from the Connections Project. I've talked with him many times about knowledge sharing, businesses being very interested in building on the open resource, Creative Commons license platform that is Connections, because businesses are coming in and saying, my workforce is retiring in the next 10 years, and how am I going to transfer the knowledge in this group? And I don't have an easily accessible way to get all those gems and rebundle them in different ways, and we have some of these tools very available and very creative in the open community. How do I build on it? And we say, come to the table, let's figure it out. And I guess the last piece on this, it sounds like the business community is going to have a closed open community, which I call restricted openness. And so, and maybe that sometimes that's what has to happen first, is that the community, again, has to be comfortable. Or there may be certain reasons, whether it's health-related reasons or individual reasons, it has to be closed. But again, I would say at some point, try to experiment with further degrees of openness, or try to expand it in time so that it doesn't just stay locked out. Because I think you'll actually find, and this is what we have found, is that there are a lot of innovators who are outside our circle who can pick up the materials and innovate and create in ways that we could never figure out within our closed circle. And that's where the big innovations come. That's where the big returns come. And if we just kept a closed circle, many times, and this again I'm thinking about the education space, we're not seeing the innovations. And we've got the world out there who are willing to innovate the expertise that we can all harness. And I think it would help businesses bottom line, and I think it kind of helps the mission bottom line as well.
Okay. The lady in the red, just here.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Young. I'm a graduate student at Georgetown's Communication, Culture, and Technology program. I was wondering how Creative Commons or what role Creative Commons can play in helping to support fair use in the overall copyright structure.
And I'm going to punt, because my general counsel says don't talk too much.
Sure.
But let me just one question. Fair use, it's the gray area. I mean, the work that we're exploring here does have gray territories, just like fair use is gray. Where is the edge? Where is the cliff? We're certainly trying to stay within the bounds and be very clear on that. Specificity can be very difficult in this new digital age. That's why I think, you know, the organizations like Creative Commons, where we're trying to understand what that boundary is, and we're not trying to blur it to confuse people. I think we're trying to say, yes, this is a gray area. We do need to understand it. And how do we deal with it as we think about fair use? Because again, we don't have it in the classroom. We have it in the new digital age.
Yeah, I think it's funny because when we were talking about the issues before the panel, Tom mentioned this idea that he brought up earlier about easy and difficult sharing. And I think in the conversation he said, well, good and bad sharing. And I bristled a little bit at that because there are many, many good sharings that are counter to the wishes of the copyright holder, right? Things that are critical of the copyrighted work and so on and so forth. Things are used for political discourse. And that's the space that fair use occupies. There are things that that are fair uses that might very well have the blessing of the copyright holder, and the question there is one of being able to make these uses without permission. But as everybody says, fair use is very fact specific and very difficult to know at first glance. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of legal uncertainty, and that's what stops a lot of good work from going forward. Now, Creative Commons provides an alternative or a way that an author can eliminate that uncertainty from the outset. So it opens up those things that are tagged as Creative Commons for that sort of sharing, which reduces, I think, the overall amount of things that you're going to have to worry about litigating. So they're complementary aspects. I mean, when people talk about sort of the founding of Creative Commons, it comes up a lot in the context of the Eldred v. Ashcroft decision, right, which upheld the extension of copyrights by another 20 years. And I think a common mistake that people make is trying to associate Creative Commons as a reaction to that, or a sort of a second best. Well, copyrights are so long that we should give authors the ability to sort of cut back on that a little bit if they choose. And the thing is, I mean, Creative Commons was founded and the ideas behind it certainly even long before the Eldred decision came down. And I think it was a recognition by the founders of the organization and the drafters of the license that you need those complements, that it's not enough to win Brown v. Board. You've got to have the Civil Rights Act. And not only that, it's also more important that you have black kids and white kids sitting at the same lunch table, that you need a change in the culture as well as wins in court, or maybe that with a change in the culture, you don't need those wins in court the same way that you did before.
So a lawyer advocating for non-legal, this is great. The gentleman his hand just there, great, the blue shirt.
Hi, Joe Miller from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies here in D.C. I've heard a lot from this panel today about the role of Creative Commons and generating creativity among people who already have access, people in Hong Kong, people in Africa. I heard a fleeting comment about community colleges in the United States. But I'm wondering if someone could expand a little bit more on what Creative Commons means for the voiceless right here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a terrific question. I'll begin and then you can share. I think that is a huge issue, and I think there's two things. One is Creative Commons mark and trademark work goes on either digital media, but it also goes on print copy. So some of the work that comes out of some of the less developed countries, it's in printable form. It's very critical that it doesn't have a lot of heavy media, because when people are when they are, one, able to access a computer, two, be able to stay on not too long, and three, they have to be able to download it quickly. How do we think about that? So these are broader problems, I think, within the space. Who has access to digital technology? Who has access to the internet? And is that divide growing? I think that is a huge, huge question. Some of the things that we've worked with previously is making sure that any of the organizations who want to make sure they're reaching the individual divide are touching base with those groups. And I would say that Creative Commons as a mission doesn't necessarily target the disenfranchised or a population per se, but so much of our work has historically. So if I would go back to my beginning with Creative Commons, which was, I was telling earlier today, the day I met Larry Lessig when he didn't win the Eldridge case. It was one after the Supreme Court case decision had come down. But the Hewlett Foundation had decided that if we were going to power open educational resources, which was to, had two goals. One, to equalize access to knowledge across the globe, create a level playing field, and secondly, to improve teaching and learning for everyone. And you can only do that if you have access to that content and knowledge. And we knew then, when we were very early on in creating over a $100 million program, that we had to rely on open licensing, else we would never be able to get there. And so I think there's actually a multiple chain effect. And I think that Creative Commons can be part of the solution. But I think part of the solution has to be things like the Department of Labor putting out that $500 million grant to community colleges who serve students who are first-generation college-going students in this country. They will be able to afford, hopefully, to go to those community colleges where, one, we have a backlog. We have a tidal wave of students going into the community colleges. Not everyone can get a seat. Technology has to be part of that solution, and a more efficient type of technology is open materials for those students to be able to access those courses online, make them freely available, and go to the community college and take a course. And we have to provide the right kind of supports for all of that to happen. But there are new ways for these models to percolate, and Creative Commons is part of that system, but it's also part of a larger ecosystem that we are certainly partnering with throughout this country and throughout the world. And I don't know if folks might want to add.
I'll continue through questions. We've only got a few more minutes. So the gentleman sitting next to you.
Yes, John Burlaw of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We're neighbors of New America in this building, so thank you for having this. I was wondering about how Creative Commons could work if there were reform of orphan works where you don't know who the copyright holder is, where there was a proposal, in fact, if somebody could update on that, where like when a work is 30 years old, like or however, but the copyright isn't renewed yet for a nominal fee, like for $5, if the artist wants to renew it, he or she can, but if the artist doesn't keep up with that or doesn't care, then it would automatically go to public domain and could be used in a lot of old movies could be restored that way. A lot of things they're just being neglected could be could be made more available to the public that way.
So, Cathy or Sherwin? Orphan works need some explaining, possibly. For
Oh, sure. I mean, so the idea behind orphan works, right, in a nutshell, is that you have these works where the copyright holder is not known or can't be found. And so you do have works, because copyright is basically, it adheres in anything that's fixed in a tangible medium and that is, at all creative. So many things are automatically copyrighted. And since copyright term is so long, then it's very easy for the known authors to sort of fall through the cracks. And so you have these works that end up being orphaned. People want to be able to use them. People may be, are willing to ask for permission, may very well be willing to pay lots of money to do it, but are completely unable to do so because they do not know who they can go to. So there are various proposals of various sorts. Some of them would place conditions upon giving a longer copyright term, one as long as that we have now. Others would limit the sort of damages that somebody could face if they use an orphan work and the author later comes forward. The idea being that, look, I made it, if they made a good faith effort to try and find the author, then maybe they shouldn't face statutory damages or certain types of injunctions depending upon the use of their work, but they should pay a reasonable rate, or if they've made a derivative work, something new based upon the old one, that their work shouldn't be closed off from the public forever. But instead, they should be able to pay a reasonable license fee and continue.
So, Cathy, Creative Commons isn't dealing with orphan works, but is there any light on that?
I kind of have a bit of a history with orphan work. Oh, Mike's here. Mike, are you trying to answer? So, Mike Carroll, our board member, I'd love for him to answer this question.
Okay. Take the guy in the CC shirt.
There he is.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Carroll. I'm one of the founding board members of Creative Commons. By day, I teach law at American University. If I can take the moment to sort of answer a couple of the other questions. The copyright system is broken in lots of different ways, and Creative Commons is an attempt to do what you can do without changing the law to ameliorate the problems, but we can't fix all the problems. So orphan works is one that Creative Commons can't fix. Here's the thing. copyright is an author's right, right? And so some of Creative Commons was founded with the idea that we want to give authors a different choice than copyright law presumes they want. And that works when you know who the author is. Orphan works is not going to be a Creative Commons problem, a solution, because the authors would have to change their mind about what the deal is. Copyright law says, these are the terms of use. Don't you like it? And some authors say, actually, no. And we created Creative Commons licenses to say, if you want to change the deal and make your works more easily accessible and free to use, here's a different deal you can offer to the public. And that's the point. But it only works when you know the authors. And in terms of fair use, I just want to say, this is a little bit of bad news for the authors, is that the Creative Commons license only picks up where fair use leaves off. And what that means is when the author has chosen to say, well, you can do anything you want with this as long as it's non-commercial, that license condition only applies if what you're doing is not a fair use. If you're making a fair use and it's a commercial use, and this is possible, the Supreme Court has said so, right? You can go ahead and do that. The CC license doesn't say anything about that. So we pick up where the law leaves off in opening things up. But it's important for licensors to understand, to the extent they think CC gives them extra control, it doesn't. And with respect to if I can just say one last thing, is the copyright licenses are one piece of what we do. It's this attempt to change the deal under the law with respect to copyright. And that's one piece of what Creative Commons is doing. But as these other questions suggest, we're part of a larger moment in time when people are trying to figure out, how do I govern information resources, and how do I make clear to other people how these information resources are shareable and not? And we want to be part of those larger conversations. So in the patent space with environmental sharing, we've sort of dipped our toes in that water because we got a little bit of demand from corporate America, who said, even though we spent all this money getting patents, we actually don't want all of the rights that patents gives us. We're willing to open up our patents for certain kinds of sharing for sustainable resource development. And I guess I would say to people in other sectors, we're looking for market signals. We're interested in talking to anyone who's trying to build any kind of commons, because we've learned a lot about what people want out of a commons and what kind of control and what kind of openness they want. So for people who are not specifically copyright geeks, but are interested in commons more generally, I think we're still someone you'd want to talk to. And with that, I'll hand it back to.
Great. Well, thanks. Given that there were probably more Mike Carrolls in the audience and the like than on the stage, I'm going to sort of take perhaps a couple more questions. We'll answer quickly, and then turn it over to the wine and cheese and Creative Commons music, of course. The gentleman there, just by you, and then this lady on the left after.
Hi, my name's George. I'm a student at Stanford, and I think this is a great event that celebrates the successes for Creative Commons. What I'm curious about is what you think the biggest challenges are going to be going forward. Thanks.
Great. And just in the interest of speed, the lady in the front here, in the white top. Great. Please answer your question.
I'm sorry. Okay. I have two related questions. One has to do with enforcement, because a license implies that there are some sort of controls over the use. And if somebody uses the work in a manner that wasn't licensed, there are going to be sanctions imposed. But our courts are not familiar with Creative Commons, and so there's no body of law, so I'm curious as to how enforcement works. And the second related question is, you've mentioned a couple of musicians that have utilized it, but most of the examples that have been discussed today relate to nonprofit activities that have been funded by grants and foundations, and I have not been able to find much information about successful commercial models built on Creative Commons.
Great. So we've got challenges, copyright law, and commercial models. And I'm going to perhaps go left to right. If Heather, anything on those 3 points?
I guess on the enforcement question, certainly there have been challenges or there have been violations of other open source type licenses, other free software licenses. There was a challenge that went up to the appellate level on a software license called the artistic license, Jacobson v. Katzer. And there the court upheld the provisions of that license, saying that even though it was distributed on this basis, saying, yeah, it's free to use, it comes with these conditions. And the fact that the code wasn't made open source and other conditions of that license weren't meant that the person who took that work and made a use of it but violated the terms of that open license was in fact infringing the copyright of the original author.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I mean, as a user of CC licenses with Global Voices, we've encountered a few times where people were using our content, which we welcome people to do, but they were not crediting us as being the source of the content, which constituted a violation of the terms of the license, because it's not only can they reuse it, but they have to say where they got it, right? That's a two-part condition. We were using the non-commercial license. I mean, we were using the not the non-commercial, but you can, anybody can use it for any purpose as long as we're credited. Were our terms. And so we actually sent letters in a couple of instances to people who were not giving us credit as being the source. And in a couple of cases, they changed and either stopped using the content in that way or added a link saying this came from Global Voices. And so obviously part of the enforcement of anything depends on your ability to actually take legal action and your resources and so on. So that's always, but there have been people, I know, like Adam Curry in the Netherlands, I think he won a court case successfully when he had a non-commercial license and somebody used it commercially,
right?
And he sued and won. So there have been a number of cases.
So the commercial question.
Right. So just on that, there's been a number of cases, and the Creative Commons license has been upheld in every case. So we can provide more documentation. I can make sure I give you my card to give you some more stories about that. On the commercial use, I think we're seeing some innovative models. I don't think it's quite, it's not widespread at this point, but I think we're seeing them. A lot of the stories are more of the nonprofits and artists, but they're not all. And so I urge you to look through the book and really pull out the stories and the case studies that we also have on our site, because they're there. And then the last question maybe for the challenges that George raised. I think because we're legal and technical is kind of our grounding, our foundation. We have kind of two major challenges. One is we're working on our 4.0 license that we'll be talking with the global affiliates with in our meeting in Warsaw, and really thinking about the version of what do we need going ahead. It's been very difficult to port the license as described, country by country by country. The level of effort that is taken is enormous, and every time the license is upgraded, how do we then port it again and again? So how do we think about creating a more efficient system for the next version of the licensing? How do we think about data as we think about our work ahead? And on the technical side, I think one of the biggest issues has been we exist for remixed creativity distribution, and we don't have a great way of tracking it. The metadata and the threads that happen don't track it well. And I think that if artists could tell the story, or academics could tell the story, or organizations could tell the story even better about how, when I use the Creative Commons license, I get this kind of people use it, this number redistributed as best we know. It's been remixed this way, and we can begin to see the derivative. It's very hard to find what happens to it. We know we put it out there, and we know good things happen, and we have some great examples here, but we don't have all of the metrics tied to that, and I think that's really important as we move ahead.
And with that, I'd like to mention the book is outside. The CD from IntraHealth is also outside, and if you stay for wine and cheese, you will be it will be accompanied by music from IntraHealth and from other CC artists, and images from Flickr CC Images. For those interested in further work, please go to creativecommons.org or become their 409,991st Twitter follower. They really have quite a fan club there. Or if you're interested in these questions more generally, I encourage you to go to oti.newamerica.net. And with that, please join me in thanking our speakers for the rich and thought-provoking discussion. And please stay for wine and cheese.